You're focused on making important decisions to take your company to the next level. But who's counting? We are. Counting on trends and insight to move your business forward, operationally and strategically. Focused on helping executives achieve their highest potential. But Who's Counting is a podcast shedding light on and breaking down critical issues and opportunities for businesses. Brought to you by Anders CPAs and Advisors.
Hi, I'm Missy Kelley.
And I'm Dave Hartley. Welcome to today's episode of But Who's Counting podcast. Our guest today is Amy Shaw, President and CEO of 9 PBS, which is the most watched PBS station in the country, which was a fact I didn't know until today. In this episode, Amy gives example after example of how 9 PBS and PBS in general in its 70-year history has innovated consistently. I didn't quite expect that given sort of what I thought about PBS. But for me, I learned a ton from the episode.
Yeah, and my favorite nugget was to think about innovation as an incremental process rather than one big giant thing that you do. So take a listen, enjoy the episode. So I'm Missy Kelley.
And I'm Dave Hartley.
Welcome to the But Who's Counting podcast. Today we are joined by Amy Shaw, President and CEO of 9 PBS, who was named to this role in February of 2020 after serving the organization in various leadership roles beginning in 2003. She is the first woman to lead 9 in its 70-year history. She is recognized as a national leader and innovator in community engagement and public media. She was inducted into the St. Louis Media Hall of Fame in 2022 and named one of the 25 most influential businesswomen in the St. Louis region by the St. Louis Business Journal in 2021. Under her leadership, 9 PBS has become the most watched PBS station in the country as a percentage of households watching, and was recognized in 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023 by the Women's Foundation of Greater St. Louis as one of the region's best places to work for women. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be here. Thank you.
It's so great to have you here.
Thanks.
So I was reading about the history of 9 PBS in preparation for this, and I learned that it was conceived by the St. Louis community, spearheaded by the presidents of Washington University and St. Louis University, along with hundreds of PTA members across the region who helped raise money to launch the effort. And the first broadcast was in 1954. Feels like there's an anniversary there. So how has public media changed over these, 70 years? And what were the big innovations along the way? I imagine there were big changes, but probably some things that maybe didn't change. So tell us about that.
So I think even the fact that we exist is a big innovation. So St. Louis figures very prominently in the history of public media. So in the early 50s, the FCC offered the opportunity for licenses for this new educational television. And the FCC put out a call to cities across the country and said, hey, if you had a license, would you be interested in it? What would you do with it? How would you use this new medium of television to serve your community, to educate, et cetera? And so folks across the country really thought about this. But before our time, we're the 8th oldest public television station in the country. So we're pretty old compared to some of the new guys, like even Washington, D.C., is many, like 2 decades after us. And so St. Louis is very early. So we were an innovator, and it was, as you said, Missy, it was WashU, it was SLU. So it was education, it was corporate. The business community said, we really think we could get behind this because it would strengthen our community to help have these educational assets. It was civic, it was even faith. Just the community was very involved in this. And so what they did is they really put their heads together and they came up with something called the St. Louis Plan. And the St. Louis Plan was a model for community licensed public television. So the stations that came before us were all licensed to universities. They were licensed to state entities. And our founders thought the big innovation would be, let's not have something that is encumbered by legislative concerns or political issues or, sort of a university overlay. They thought it would be really helpful to have a community responsive organization. So this is how we came about. Now, we were going to be the first public television station licensed to a community in the country. However, as you mentioned, those PTA moms, we were a little short on the money. So we were $100,000 shy of getting our license. So PTA moms did go to work. They raised that $100,000. We got our license. But in the meantime, Pittsburgh actually borrowed that St. Louis plan and they got on the air first. They are also celebrating their 70th anniversary. They celebrated in April. We will turn 70 in September. So we were so close. But even that St. Louis plan and some of the founders of our station then went on to figure prominently in the founding of PBS, which doesn't happen until 1970. PBS doesn't go on the air until 1970. So there was this sort of assortment of public television stations around the country, and there wasn't really an affiliated network. So the fact that PBS came about and became this powerhouse of content and community and connection is really quite stellar. And that really, I think, is the innovation of sort of how we came about. And the fact that 70 years later, we're still connected to our community. It's the lifeblood of what we do. It's how we do our work. Education is so important. That was the other big innovation of our founders, is that they really thought of educational television as a way to connect with kids that didn't have access to high quality education. So they were teaching on TV. They were rolling TVs into classrooms as teachers were teaching via live broadcast from the studios on the campus of Washington University in the early, mid 50s, early 60s, as a way to level the playing field so that kids had access to content they didn't otherwise have access to. And that still is who we are today with education. So it is a remarkable and admirable and amazing history, and one that I'm just so deeply proud to be a part of. And having been at 9 PBS for 21 years, but I also grew up in St. Louis. So I grew up on our content. I grew up on the station, and my parents were big fans. So it really means a lot.
That is truly fascinating. And I grew up watching the content too. And there's just something very home-like about turning that station on. So I did want to just follow up on the fact that you are the first female in the 70-year history of the station. That feels like a big innovation, a big milestone. And I'm curious, did that fact impact your approach to innovation and how you tackled this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think some of the timing of it plays prominently. So I think, I was a little nervous being the first woman, that you don't want to be the first and the last, because if you're the first and there isn't a second, then it's a fluke. So it's important that there are people that come after me. And I honestly don't think it's as much about me as it just, there was sort of a habit of the kind of leader that was selected. And this is also not unusual in our industry. There were a lot of largely white men who were the leaders of public television stations around the country. Now, so much has changed, but I was very honored to be the first woman, but also the timing with COVID. So I become president in February 2020, and then COVID, 6 weeks later, here we go. And initially I felt I was very sad, because it had been such a tumultuous time before that I was ready. We were ready for stability, and we were ready for things to be maybe a little easier. And then to have a pandemic was really tough. But I do think being a woman helped, because I really focus on the human side of things. And in a pandemic, I think in crisis, you become more of who you really are. And so stretch to your limit. If you're a miserable person, I think you're going to be more miserable. If you're optimistic, you're going to be more optimistic. And I think that has served me very well, and served our staff very well, to be thoughtful about all of our staff went home. We made sure that they got home and did not come back in, which was very, very hard, because we were so used to being work-based and place-based. But we knew that everybody had families. And even though we were considered an essential service, we wanted to take care of people. So I think being a woman helped there, because I was cognizant of, all the family members who were, for the first time, teaching their kids on Zoom and dealing with all the chaos that they were doing. And also not only chaos, but people were terrified. We didn't know what this was. And so I think being a woman has helped with that. I also think that because I had broken my shoulder terribly the week before I had become president. And so I was really banged up. I wasn't driving. I was pretty heavily medicated because I was just healing in place. And I think that made me very vulnerable to say to our team, hey, I'm not really my best right now. I'm going to need a lot of help. And I think that helped as we were going into the pandemic as well. And so I think there are leaders for certain times, and I feel grateful to be a leader at a time when I think my skill set and my demeanor was needed and necessary at that particular time.
Yeah, Amy. So one of the unique things about 9 PBS is that it's the most watched PBS station in the country as a percentage of households watching. So I
Yes.
think when you reflect on your leadership and then also the decades of history that came before you, why is that? What is special and unique about 9 PBS that makes it connect with the St. Louis community? And then also, you've mentioned transparency, you've mentioned optimism. Are there unique things that are part of the culture there that are part of that success, creating that success?
Yeah, I think it goes back to our history, Dave. I think it goes back to that place of really being community connected. That was so important. And that community support was there from the very beginning. People really loved what we did early, and then that continued. I do think that there was a time that the station kind of operated more like a commercial enterprise, certainly nonprofit, but maybe wasn't as community connected. But I think, when I was hired in 2003, and it was under a newer president who really wanted to get us back to community and wanted to get us back to education. And so I think that that has been an important thing. And I think the pandemic really, people were at home. They were really tied to their television, especially live broadcast, at a time when television viewing is just continuing to go down, down, down. And even though we're the number one station, every public television station, every broadcaster is seeing declines over the last 10 years. It's a pretty steady stair step. Now, COVID slowed that a little bit because people were watching. But I think it is, it's an apples to apples comparison. So in 2020, we officially became the most watched station. So that's the first time. In 2021, we were also the most watched station. Now in 2022, we jumped to number two, like by just a fraction. And then in 2023, we were also the most watched station. And so I don't think it's a fluke. I think how we have behaved and conducted ourselves in times of crisis, I think made people really connect to what we do. And I think how we changed our messaging on air. So, when I think about 9 PBS, and Missy, you said when you turn on our channel, you just feel like you're home. I liken to our time in the pandemic as that we were a warm blanket for people. It was comforting in a time where everything was chaotic and unknown. We were a staple and a constant. And a lot of our content during that time, that was so important. And we were doing educational content for children who did not have access to high quality broadband, who were learning from home, who were definitely not on a level playing field. And so we were teaching on TV, which we continue today, but we have transitioned that to early childhood education versus school age, because we know that there are half of the kids in the St. Louis region do not have access to high quality pre-K. So I think the way that we have done these things and the way that we talked about the work we did and centered community really has pulled people to us and really made people want to support us. And it's important also that we mention the financial support, because we are a community supported institution. And so our financial support has also really been strong. We are not just doing things that are human and interesting and community based, but we're also finding ways to make it sustainable at the same time. And that was one of the things that was really important to me as I was vying for this position, is that we would be a financially healthy company. As a nonprofit, I think we feel like we have to limp along. And yes, we're never going to have the assets of a for-profit enterprise, but being nonprofit doesn't mean you can't turn a profit. It means we put those excess dollars back into the operations to serve our community even better and more effectively. And we are very financially healthy, and that has allowed us to grow, which allowed us to do more in the community and support the community's needs as they've been expressed to us, which I think then pulls people to watch us on all different kinds of platforms. So it's been really an interesting ride. And I don't take lightly this #1 rating because it does tell me that people really want what we have. And we also have to provide it on every possible platform where people are as well.
Sure. So, you mentioned being a nonprofit, and after 2020, many nonprofits struggled financially. There just wasn't the philanthropic, there weren't the donor dollars there. Did you experience that, or was it different for you?
That was the thing. I was terrified, Missy, at the very beginning because, here I am, a new CEO, and I'm thinking like we're going to have smooth sailing. We had been through a lot, and I was very concerned about our financial picture. We were really tight. And so here we are heading into a pandemic. All indications were that we were going to face some pretty stiff financial headwinds. And my big concern is, and I had been through 4 other downsizings in the company that had hit us very, very hard over the years. And I just knew if we downsized people at the beginning of the pandemic, one, it would be not the human thing to do. And I was very concerned for the people that we would have to let go. 2, I was also very concerned that we would never get back to a level of service that would allow us to do what people were asking us to do. And so I said to the board pretty early, listen, whatever we do, we cannot downsize people. This is not the right time to do it. We will never get back to where we are. It'll take us a decade. We will have breached community trust. Whereas some of my colleagues in public media were saying, listen, you have to downsize early and often. You can't carry this kind of freight on your books. You have to be prepared for these headwinds. Thankfully, we never had to make this choice. We were fine. And part of this, I think we were very fortunate, unlike a lot of other nonprofits that could not do the work that they do. Think about the symphony or, the aquarium, like people weren't going places. We were still very present in people's lives because we were broadcasting and because we were doing the work and we were connecting with people on various platforms. So we were fortunate. I don't take that lightly. We were very, very fortunate. But I also think the fact that we went to work almost immediately on what is it that was our unique asset and contribution to the community during this time. And we got connected. A friend of mine is a superintendent of schools for a pretty major school district. We got connected to him, and through him, we were on a Zoom with all the superintendents, curriculum directors, and this was very, very early. This was as schools were announcing they were shutting down, and nobody really knew what to do. Everybody was trying to figure this out. And so we were on the Zoom and we said, listen, we don't know what we can do, but we have a sense that there is something that we can offer here. And the superintendents and curriculum directors said, listen, we're really concerned about our youngest children. They're not used to learning via technology. Now, the older kids are used to this. The younger kids are not. We're very concerned about parents. They're not used to this. They have no idea how hard this is going to be to teach their kids at home and to manage their kids' education. We're very concerned about kids that don't have access to high quality broadband because everything's going to be electronic. And we're very concerned about math in particular and reading. Literacy was going to be such an important thing. And we said, okay, we can do this. So, and they also said, they were the ones that said, listen, you used to teach on TV. That's kind of your start. What about teaching on TV? And so within a month, we spun up a show with 12 local teachers teaching via Zoom. They would send us the files. We would edit them to the best of our ability and then broadcast them 5 days a week. We were doing at one point 3 hours a day. It was a pretty heavy lift. We paid the teachers. They were also teaching their kids and probably their own kids at home. So it was really like these incredible teachers who did this work, and people really responded. So philanthropic supporters really supported that and this ability to connect with our community around the crisis. And so again, we've been fortunate, but I also think we did not sit back and wait for something to happen. We really charged in and wanted to be of service and figure out how we could use our unique assets to support the community.
You innovated.
We did. It was also hard. Think about all of our staff. They were everybody was in chaos because, you're thinking about your family, you're terrified of getting this illness, you don't know what's happening, we don't know our financial picture, but people really just jumped in and did what they needed to do. And we really have an extraordinary staff, and I'll never forget that time because it was a moment that none of us wanted. And I always joke that we have to make lemonade out of these moldy lemons. And we really had a giant pile of moldy lemons. I mean, it was bad. I also remember in 2020, 2019, we really suffered a huge hardship. And in 2019, I kept saying to our staff, listen, a year from now, we're going to be looking back at 2019 and we're going to say, we just weathered so many hard, difficult things. And then 2020 came and it was so exponentially worse that it was really hard. So the last 5 years for so many people have been chaotic and challenging. And so our ability to innovate and iterate incrementally during that time, I think is nothing short of amazing because we're really small and scrappy. We have about 70 full-time people. At that time, we were about 55 full-time people. So we're very, very small. But I also think we were small enough that we could really kind of wrap our arms around people and take care of people.
So now that things have gotten back to normal-ish, we definitely have a new normal. How do you ensure that the station remains relevant when you have all of these streaming services and, of course, the ubiquity of smartphones where you can get all of this content at the tap of your thumb?
Yeah, so this is also part and parcel to your question about how things have changed over the years. I'm sure it was very, very difficult in the early days. I'm sure it was very difficult, but I think that there might have been some nice salad days in between there where you knew what you were doing, you knew how broadcast worked, people turned on the TV, there were 4 networks, maybe 5 or 6, at best. And then comes cable, which really knocked people for a loop. And I wasn't in the industry then, I was much younger. But I do know people talking about how cable really upended the industry. And now those same people are saying the streaming tidal wave, cable doesn't even hold a candle to the streaming tidal wave. It's interesting. The president of PBS, who's an extraordinary woman, her name is Paula Kerger, and she's the longest serving CEO of PBS. She's been in the position for 18 years, says a lot about we use the same tools, content creation, distribution, but we're in very different businesses. And so I tend to think we're in very different businesses. So while I have all the streaming services, it's sort of an occupational hazard, and I enjoy what's there, it's a different game. So Netflix, other streaming services, what their priority is the bottom line, right? They're for-profit enterprises. It's about subscriber base, the volume of subscriber base, the margins and profit and shareholder value. Our shareholder value is, are we serving the citizens of St. Louis because we're licensed to the community? So that's a very different enterprise when you're making decisions about what your shareholder value is versus profit versus service. So we get a little bit lucky when it comes to our streaming and our content creation and distribution because we get to really think about that more from a community perspective, right? So we have something called Passport. It's a member benefit. It's a streaming service, but it's PBS content. It's extraordinary PBS content. There's actually more content in that library than on Netflix. And it's a member benefit. So for a small monthly fee or an annual contribution, you become a member of 9 PBS and you gain access to this incredible streaming library. Plus, we stream all of our local content for free in real time and after the fact, so you can go find it. And a lot of the PBS content is also available just online via the app. So we try to make all of that content very accessible. We don't make a subscription fee a barrier to accessing that content because we do want it to be available for everybody. And we also are continuing to iterate with more content on more platforms and also continuing the broadcast operation. That's, I think, the difference is that Netflix and others, Hulu never had a broadcast operation. Netflix discontinued its DVD operation. We actually really need to keep the broadcast operation going for the time being. One, for public service and safety. You think about storms coming through, and we've been through a lot of storms in St. Louis. One of the most redundant and resilient technologies is broadcast. Our tower never goes out. And actually, there are terrible storms this past week. Our transmitter is in South St. Louis County, and the power did go out, and the generator kicked right on, and we were never off air. So everybody still has that access. So we still have the ability to transmit and to offer messages of public safety. Cell phone technology, we know, doesn't do that always. And so there are still reasons to broadcast. There's also an older generation that is very used to broadcast, and we want to continue to support them. And there are people like me that have a foot in both worlds, who I like to watch Masterpiece on Sunday nights in real time because there's something comforting about it. And if I miss it, I'm going to watch it on Passport after the fact, or sometimes I'll binge it before. And I have my foot in the other world of streaming and social media and technology. And so it's like we do all of it. So it's all changing. And I don't know that we're ever going to be in a place where we're like, whew, we figured it out. We're going to have to continue to be on our toes, which is also really hard for our staff, I think, because I think people want things to settle down and be normal. And I was at a conference a few weeks ago, and one of my colleagues said, I was talking with him about change management and, how do you keep your people safe during this whole time of all this change and keep them, healthy? And he said, well, if you don't like change, just try irrelevance. And I think that's really what we're motivated by is being relevant and knowing what our community needs and wants and paying attention to technology. How do we do that in a way that doesn't leave anybody out, but also pulls a lot of people in based on how they use technology and content today?
So Missy and I are visiting today with Amy Shaw, who's the president and CEO of Nine PBS. So Amy, thanks again for taking time to be with us today. I wanted to ask about one of the things in doing research for this episode was Nine PBS's online presence. And so I was actually really impressed because I'm going to refer to my notes because I don't want to get this wrong. But on Facebook, you have 38,000 Facebook followers, 28,000 YouTube subscribers with over 5,000 videos posted on YouTube, and almost 10,000 followers on Instagram. So I look at that presence and how active you are, and I'm like, okay, this must be a key part of the strategy. So we just talked about how the world is changing, the advent of streaming and those types of things. I guess, how do you view social media? Because a lot of our clients are looking at this and trying to figure out, how much do I invest in it? Is it really that strategic for me? So I guess what's your point of view on how 9PBS approaches social media?
It's very strategic and essential. And so I think the important thing is that you don't want to be on every platform. Not every platform is for you or for your audience. So for us, Twitter has never been a huge platform. We've used it. We just never really had as many followers as we really wanted. And it wasn't the right platform, especially from a video perspective. But Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok in particular. And we do have a TikTok influencer on staff, and she helps teach people at PBS about TikTok. She's brilliant and so sharp, and started with us as an intern and, kept growing into her role. And now she's a full producer at 9PBS. But those platforms are really important because what people often want is, the short segments. They want to learn about something without a huge investment of time and energy. They want to be entertained. They want to be educated. We know this about our audience. And the more local content that we can create for those platforms really fills an appetite and a gap that people have. The other thing that we get to do that I think it's harder for other media companies in the local community is we get to go a little deeper. So while you may hear headlines on the news, we often get to go to, well, how did we get to here? Why is this situation happening? So more depth, more context. We can do that over multiple parts, which we have done. We can do it in short segments. One of the segments on TikTok is famous duels in St. Louis. Who knew? Another, how did St. Louis streets get their names? And so like Doherty Ferry and all these interesting, how did these things come about? And so we want people to be proud of our community and be a part of our region and be advocates for our region. And so the content we create, especially for those platforms, is important. We're moving to this place of not just thinking about broadcast first and then deriving content from those broadcast platforms for social. Now we're really thinking about the content first and then thinking where that content would be best placed. Because what TikTok likes and the algorithms is different than what Facebook likes, is what's different than Instagram likes versus our broadcast audience. And so all of that, really, we have to be very thoughtful, which is also, I think, the big innovation is the diversity of our staff, both in age, sex, ethnicity. We need to have people who are not all the same. And especially having younger staff has been critically important to really be thoughtful about those platforms because they're the consumers of that content. I'm a consumer of content on TikTok. I don't know. I know if TikTok gets banned, we'll just put all that stuff on Facebook. It'll be okay. I like to consume all that stuff. Not everybody does, but it's important. I want to know what our local stories are. I don't see them before they're published, but we need to be in different places for different people, which is also a different thing. I think it used to be like appointment viewing and you would watch a show at 7:00. But even when you were appointment viewing, you didn't hit the full audience at 7 p.m. So you have the opportunity to use that content in different ways in different places. So it's pretty great, actually. I like the plethora of opportunities for local content creation, partly because social media content is a lot less expensive than full broadcast content like a documentary or a regular series. And so we get to touch more people and connect with more people using a different economy of scale.
So on the local content front and also just the engagement with the community, I was looking at the awards that you've received over time. And in 2023, I believe you got 3 Emmys for 3 different programs. One of those being a partnership with Lion Forge Entertainment, which is a local Dave Stewart Jr. For Drawn In Brave Hero Part 2. So tell us how did that partnership come about?
Such a great story. So I think it goes back to the service to community. So we're very connected to Dave Stewart too. And we really, with the work that he has done in animation and is doing in animation is extraordinary. He won the Academy Award for Best Animated Short for Hair Love, which is extraordinary. So we kept talking about, and this was years in the making of talking about what to do together. And because of the pandemic and because we know that kids have fallen further behind in their literacy, and in particular, Black and brown children, all kids have suffered, and our content is good for all kids. But in particular, we knew it was important that we had content that really represented the needs of our Black and brown kids, that kids could see themselves as the heroes of those stories and as the agents of change. And so we came up with the idea of Drawn In, and a very long journey to get there. But this idea of a comic book universe with these 4 fearless, adorable, sweet, funny, challenging kids who ask great questions. And they use language and vocabulary to solve these epic challenges. It has been very successful. We're exporting it across the country now to public television stations. And it's been a really great opportunity. We also published comic books in addition to the animated shorts, which could be used on social media and distributed independently, which is good because we want kids to be able to see it. If mom has a cell phone and that's how they're getting their content, they can get it there. If they have a cell phone, they can get it via Facebook. They can get it via Instagram. They can get it on the website. They can get it on the app. And then we put those shows together and created a broadcast opportunity because we also wanted those kids that don't have access to high quality broadband to be able to get those programs. And we also published 40,000 comic books that align with the episodes. So we've done 8 comic books at this point, and those were distributed to St. Louis public schools and via trusted community partners like the library system and Parents as Teachers and 24/1 and partners who really understand community and have relationships with school systems, community partners, kids, families, et cetera, so that kids had the printed material, because we know that kids in low-income communities have a real deficit when it comes to printed material, which very much handicaps their ability to acquire language, which means they don't read, which means they don't learn. So up until third grade, you're using language to learn to read. And after third grade, you're using reading to learn. So if you've not mastered reading by third grade, you're at a distinct disadvantage that will follow you really through high school and impact your ability to graduate, be successful, be a gainfully employed community member. So it really is paramount, this connection to early childhood and using content that represents kids and helps them learn the way that they learn. So it's been a really extraordinary opportunity. We learned a lot. And I think that won't be the last one.
Oh, I'm excited about that. It really is. It really is really a cool program. So, Dave, should we move on to our Make It Count section?
Actually, I want to do one more question, though.
Okay.
So, Amy, I want to go a little bit retro, and I want to talk. You talked a little bit about sort of the connection with kids. So, when I think back, when I was a kid, I was influenced by PBS shows. So, when I think about Sesame Street, Zoom, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, kind of all of those things, and I was in a decently rural community where I grew up, didn't have access to a lot of resources, so that I'm sure that had a very positive impact on me. And then when my kids were little, when I think about all the shows that they were into, when I think about Arthur and Teletubbies and, go through that list. And so, and I know that's a part of your mission. So when you think about connecting and really powering the next generation of kids in the St. Louis community, I guess, what does that mean? And where is that on the radar with 9 PBS, and kind of how do you affect the outcomes for those kids?
It's a huge priority. So early childhood education is so important and really does, figures prominently into our founding in 1954 and into PBS's founding in 1970 when they first go on the air, and even in the mandates of Congress with the Public Broadcasting Act of 1967, which is thinking about using the airwaves to help kids learn and to help people learn. And so kids really matter. So obviously, we have this great equity, as you mentioned, Dave, in terms of the history of kids' content. So I also grew up on Zoom. I can do the ARM thing. There were actually two versions of Zoom. There was the old one, and then it came back about 10 years ago as a new version. It was very successful. Company came back.
Electric Company.
Yeah. Morgan Freeman, Rita Moreno were on the original Electric Company. I mean, these were so clever in how they were helping kids learn. I think the other thing about those shows that was so powerful is that they were great for parents too, because they were funny and they were clever, and it was not just about sort of the sugary content going to kids. And so PBS Kids and the kids programs are critically important because they're education based, they're rigorously researched, they're focused on educational outcomes like social and emotional well-being, literacy, math, STEM, so important. So the innovations abound there in terms of educational content. The other thing I would mention is that for a while there, some of the other streaming companies started to go all in on kids. And when they realized they couldn't turn a hefty profit from it, they've abandoned it. So PBS Kids really is still the gold standard. And there's a data point more recently, for the 21st year in a row, PBS is the most trusted media institution. And for kids, PBS Kids is the most trusted media institution by like 70 some odd percent believe it's super trusted. The next one down is in the 30s. And so and there's a lot of great kids content out there, but I think if you're being entertained, that's one thing. If you're being educated, that's another thing. So the innovations through kids content has been extraordinary all through the last 50 years. So Mr. Rogers is a very early innovator, not just about keeping kids safe and healthy, but this idea that kids really are their agents of learning and their own agents of change, which then leads the way to Sesame Street and all these great programs. And today there are so many great programs. You may not know that Mr. Rogers, which is now called Fred Rogers Productions, has 6 other shows that are active on PBS Kids. Odd Squad, which is a little bit older, those 8 to 10-year-olds, super clever, live action, some animation with these like kids that are kind of spy agents, and they solve all these wacky problems with math and critical thinking. And there's also a show called Daniel Tiger, which is from the original Daniel Striped Tiger from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And now it's animated. And so the conceit is that Daniel Striped Tiger had a little boy, and his name is Daniel Tiger. And all the kids in the neighborhood are the kids of the original characters of Mr. Rogers. It's darling. It's been going strong. There's a couple of other shows that are just so fantastic. So PBS Kids, so the kids' content itself is critically important. And then what we do with it is critically important. So we work with networks of trusted partners, the library systems, parents as teachers, childcare centers, school districts, educators, to really understand what kids need and where can we fill gaps that those organizations are unable to fill. The demand is extraordinary. We cannot meet the demand for our kind of early childhood education services at this time. And we're growing this area exponentially. It has grown from 1.5 people back 6 years ago to now it's 14 people and continuing to grow. We also have early education fellows who are sort of the folks in training to help us fill that capacity, which is founded by one of our founders' families, which is so great. And those people are working in the community, taking these resources out, creating learning opportunities around the kids' content, family engagement, really like a holistic learning approach. And so we're doing more and more and more of that, and working hand in hand with these trusted education partners and families and so many community organizations who really want this kind of support. And so it isn't just what people see on TV, it's what we're doing in the community. And our focus primarily is really low income communities because we know that those kids have it more challenging. We love every kid. We want every kid to be successful, but some kids are going to be just fine because they do have the resources at home. We want to make sure we're using those resources to uplift the kids that are a little more challenged and don't have those resources. And I do want to tell you about a new show coming up because it's so great. It's coming out in the fall and it's called Carl the Collector. And I love this show so much. We've just seen a couple previews of it. And it's a kid, a kid who is, he's the lead character and he's on the autism spectrum. And it's a very soft show. So it's not loud. It's very calming. So it's, really thinking about sensory overload. So Carl is the main character. There's also a little girl character who is a fox and and Carl is a raccoon. And the girl character represents girls on the autism spectrum who are often overlooked, often very late diagnosed. And so it's beautiful, it's clever, it's funny, it gives me goosebumps to look at it and to even talk about it. And I think it's going to be such a hit with adults and with kids. And it's lovely. And it's a supportive friend group who really support Carl. The whole thing is that kids on the autism spectrum often collect things. So he collects all these incredible things from sort of the obvious to the sublime. And I can't wait for it to come out and I can't wait for families to see it because I think it really speaks to representing kids on the spectrum, but it's also going to be great for all kids. So it's not just for kids on the spectrum. So I'm thrilled about that and the innovation of PBS Kids to think about this and to ensure that we're really bringing content to families across the community who can see themselves represented in the content and can learn from it.
That is that's an example of innovation, in my opinion. When I think about, especially what you said at the beginning of the description for that show, that it's very soft, that for kids with sensory overload, which is typically people on the autism spectrum, I mean, there are shows that they can't watch or that they won't watch or that are too overstimulating for them. And so to direct content to that group, not only does it speak to the commitment to community that 9 PBS has, but to, the diversity of our community, which we don't often think about. When we think about diversity, we don't often think about people that are differently abled. And so I truly appreciate that. I'm super excited about that. And that's another one that I'm going to catch because I want to see it.
It's great. Also, the way that it's done is so clever, and it's based, it's with Fuzzy Town Productions, and Fuzzy Town Productions also has done all these books.
Okay.
And they're so clever and so creative. And I think it's just going to be, gangbusters. It's going to be great.
When does that one come out?
It comes out in the fall. There's not an air date yet. But it'll likely be September, October.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, great. Well, I can't wait for that. Okay, so now we're going to move to our Make It Count section. In this segment, we like to give our listeners an actionable takeaway that they can count on related to innovation. So if you had one piece of advice on how to innovate, what would it be?
Oh, I would think about the last 5 years, as I've talked about, have been really, really bumpy, personally and professionally. I've lost some people very, very close to me. I have battled a pretty major illness. And professionally, just, every day was something new during the pandemic, and so many new things. And then overlay that, the changes in the media industry and changes in nonprofits and changes in communities and division and vitriol and the state of affairs in our world. It's a lot. And I think what I think about a lot as it relates to innovation is I think sometimes we think about innovation as like these big, bright, shiny objects. And I think it's more incremental than that. And so my thing is about thinking incrementally and not trying to, metaphorically bite the whole elephant at once, but break it into pieces. Like, how do we move this a little more slowly? And I have to remember that as a leader, because while I may want to go full force, our staff may not be ready for that. And so being thoughtful about the incremental nature of innovation is important. And the other I'll do two is
Great. We'll take it.
Take your ego out of it. Like there's almost no surety anymore. Like we don't know things because everything it's almost unknowable. When we're trying out new ideas, I think oftentimes, your ego gets in the way because you want something to succeed so badly, or your reputation is on the line, or your ego. And I think taking ego out of it is so much easier and lowers the temperature for everybody and the degree of difficulty for everybody. So those are the two things I would say when it comes to innovation, especially in context of this time that we're living in, which is really quite extraordinary.
Yes. So thank you, Amy Shaw, President and CEO of 9 PBS. We enjoyed our time today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for joining the But Who's Counting podcast. Make sure to never miss an episode by subscribing on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and let us know what you think by rating and reviewing. Keep up with more Anders CPAs and Advisors insights by following us on social media through the handles in the show notes. We'll see you next time.